Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is brought to us by Charlotte Malrich. Charlotte said that we could shout out whatever we want, so this week we wanted to just raise attention to the new charges that the J20 people got. We're going to be re-releasing our Support J20 shirts and helping with more of their legal funds. So if you want to go to whichsidecollective.org, and you can get the shirts now. Because fuck racism.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
This is episode 228.
Yeah, this week we talked to Brad Johnson, author of Justice is Served. It's all about being Christian and how that inherently supports veganism. It's a pretty interesting read and a great conversation. But first, here's our side. This week for our side, we wanted to bring another piece done by Submedia. If you can't tell, we kind of fucking love them. And they're a part of CZN too, so check that out. This is What is Direct Action? So, sit back and enjoy.
Direct action is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot when describing anarchist tactics. And rightly so, since it's one of the main ways anarchists put our values of autonomy, self-organization, and mutual aid into practice. So, what is it exactly? Well, a simple definition would be to say that direct action is a political action aimed at achieving a specific goal or objective, in which is carried out directly by an individual or group of people without appealing to a higher authority for legitimacy. Now, this broad definition covers a huge range of activities, everything from banner drops to prison breaks, and it doesn't necessarily tell us much about the politics of those carrying out the action itself. Direct actions are tactics, meaning that they are a specific type of action that can be used to implement a wide variety of strategies. While you don't have to be an anarchist in order to carry out or to participate in a direct action, the concept itself holds a special importance for anarchists and other anti-authoritarian radicals. And that's because well-timed and well-executed direct actions can offer an escape from the endless cycle of representational politics, which assumes its highest form in the state. The German philosopher Max Weber famously defined the state as a monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force. In other words, state violence, whether dispensed by a politician's pen, a judge's gavel, or a cop's baton, is a manifestation of legitimate force and a harsh reminder of the state's role as the ultimate mediator of social conflict. This mandate includes everything from interpersonal disputes that end up settled in the courts or by someone calling the cops, all the way up to the broader conflicts that spring from systemic inequality and the structural imbalances inherent to capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy, ableism, and heteropatriarchy. In its purest form, direct action does not aim to persuade those in power, but seeks to foster and assert the power of those carrying out the action themselves. When people carry out a direct action, they are rejecting the state's monopoly on decision-making and asserting their own autonomy while providing an example for others to follow. To take just one example, rather than petitioning a politician to vote against the construction of a pipeline or appealing to state-controlled regulatory bodies, those who favor a direct action approach often find it more effective and empowering to go and block the pipeline themselves, directly. Direct action can also be used to set up networks of mutual aid. 50 years ago, the Black Panthers were faced with the reality of widespread poverty and lack of service provision in their communities. Rather than appealing to the government or the conscience of white America, the Panthers set to work organizing their own health clinics and breakfast programs for hungry school children. These programs were part of a broader strategy of building community power and were identified by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover as a primary threat to national security, by which he meant a threat to the legitimacy of the state and the white supremacist power structure that upholds it. Because they transgress the official channels of politics and often the law itself, direct action campaigns are inevitably met with a whole toolbox of tactics aimed at bringing conflicts back under state control. These can range from state and corporate-funded nonprofits infiltrating and co-opting grassroots movements in order to force a change in tactics or leadership, all the way up to extreme repression such as mass incarceration and targeted assassinations carried out by state and paramilitary forces. Although as a concept, direct action has probably existed for as long as there have been hierarchies to rebel against, the term itself dates back to the early workers' movement, where it was used to describe militant practices such as industrial sabotage and wildcat strikes. By physically blocking production and collectively defending themselves from repression, workers were able to force concessions from their capitalist masters. The widespread use of these tactics eventually led to the legalization of trade unions and a whole host of concessions aimed at bringing the more radical sections of the workers' movement back under state control. One of the most significant heydays of direct action in modern history took place in 1970s Italy. Faced with a housing crisis provoked by capitalist restructuring of the economy, thousands of migrants from the country's south squatted apartment blocks and physically defended families from eviction. When the government attempted to hike transit fares and energy costs, tens of thousands of people refused to pay the increased rates in collective actions known as auto reductions. Italy was, at that time, a deeply religious, conservative, and rigidly patriarchal country in which both abortion and divorce were illegal. Within this context, a fearless women's liberation movement organized an underground network of clinics with doctors and nurses providing hundreds of volunteers with the necessary skills to perform clean and safe abortions. This direct action approach to reproductive health was complemented by massive and regular demonstrations calling for the legalization of abortion, which were ultimately successful. In our current age of increasing polarization, uncertainty, and insecurity, direct action offers a way for our movements to build and assert our collective power, both to defend our communities and to fight for the world we want to live in.
And now, here's our interview with Bradley Johnson.
Why don't we just talk about how Christianity supports veganism?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Maybe even the opposite, how veganism supports Christianity.
Okay. Yeah, nice. That's perfect. Yeah, getting into the deep stuff. Yeah, I mean, I'll just touch briefly back on a couple things that I said before, and then I'll kind of dive into some of the deeper or some of the other aspects of what I have in the book and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, really where I do start with a lot of conversations that go the same way as, like I said before, Genesis 1:29. It's all the way up until Adam and Eve are ousted from Eden, if you will. All the way up until that point, Eden is a very utopian picture that we have, and it was designed to be, the perfect place to live and work and just exist in full harmony with nature and other animals. And so yeah, Genesis 1:29, God says, I've given you every plant or seed-bearing plant and fruit-bearing tree, and they'll be yours for food. And we don't have to look too far into that to realize that everything that we had there was good to go. And one thing people will bring up too is like, oh, what about vitamin B12? But it's unfortunate that America is still trapped in this idea that vitamin B12 only comes from animals, because we don't have the nutrition education in schools to show us that vitamin B12 is a bacterial strain that exists in nature. And so, everything was already good to go in Eden. And so it was only after the fall of man, that things got complicated and sin entered in, and everything after that kind of just created more of the bent that humans had to just be wreaking havoc and everything like that. So, yeah, I mean, we're still in that spot today. We're still, battling against sin, if you will. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, aside from that, in looking at how Christianity and veganism overlap, is just looking at, I think I have a spot in the book that talks about kind of fruits of the Spirit, basically in Galatians, where everything that we learn about there, like peace, patience, kindness, love, self-control, everything that kind of goes along with that, like those are core embodiments of veganism as well. Because if we kind of we can start from kind of the old golden rule aspect of like Christianity is very much, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Basically you should be serving. The call of the Christian is to serve others in the way that you would want to be served. And veganism it's so overlapped with that, because it's like, if I don't want any unjust violence taken towards me. So how could I holistically be a Christian and still be having, a chicken on my plate each night for dinner? Like, the more I thought about it years and years ago, I was just like, none of this stuff is adding up unless I have this additional component of veganism that isn't often talked about in Christian circles. And yeah, I mean, it's so much of it is tradition. Like there's, it's crazy to think about how, it's the whole idea of like meat and potatoes, or, chicken Alfredo, or whatever you have, spaghetti and meatballs, all these kind of different sub-ethnic dishes that have kind of like made their way into the American psyche. People don't really question anything unless something is personally on the line. And it just sucks because the consumeristic mindset within America is so much like, well, if I can have it now, and if I don't see any issue with that, if there's nothing like tangibly right in front of me causing a problem, then I'll just ignore anything else that is causing a problem. So yeah, it just sucks because everything's so fragmented. Yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else I was going to add.
Well,
I don't know.
I love talking to Christian vegans, mainly because I was raised in an extremely religious family, the LDS faith, Mormon. So they do, I read the Bible cover to cover for the first time when I was 10, right? But what's interesting, when I became vegan, veganism is what pushed me away from religion. And so I love hearing about people who have just the opposite reaction, because I find it fascinating that two people can get two separate things from the same thing. Does that kind of make sense?
It does, actually. And yeah, and actually that's very fascinating. And I'm glad you shared that, because I feel like your reaction is probably the more like recognizable and sensible one. I feel like mine is the more freakish one. I feel like I'm definitely more the outlier for sure. And yeah, I mean, because I don't know, there's just a lot of like, I've talked with my girlfriend recently a couple of times about like, I can totally see it from your perspective, man. Like because it's like there's injustice everywhere, it's not even, I feel like it starts with animals, because animals are the most defenseless. Like they're entirely at our mercy. They can't fight back at all. And then it just goes up from there. It steadily, injustice climbs the ladder all the way to, humans. It's all about, gay rights, African American rights, like rights for women, like everything that's worth fighting for, every kind of face or voice that has been attempted to be blotted out by, power hungry people. Like, yeah, it's all connected, I guess, is what I'm getting at. But I can totally see it from your perspective, where it's like, if everything extends so far, and it's almost like, all of this stuff comes back down to like things that humans are doing wrong. It's almost like it constantly pushes you to this place of like, well, God, like, what is happening? Like, where have you been? Like, what, what is your plan to bring everyone who's causing injustice to justice? Like, that's the whole point, is justice is giving, the very definition of justice is giving everyone what he or she deserves, impartially to the group in question, which is why animals get overlooked so often, because they don't have representation other than themselves and or the people who are looking out for them on their behalf, such as vegans. So yeah, those are at least some initial thoughts, but yeah, so, I can definitely understand it from your perspective.
One, I just want to know, I'm going to quote you later saying a Christian is saying the atheist is more sensible. Let's just get that in the clear.
You can go for that, man.
No, but saying that, how how do you come, because it sounds like these are conversations you have a lot, and so how do you internally make that increase your faith when you're saying that it sensibly makes sense to make the other choice? Like, is it just a hope, or is there something greater than that within yourself?
Yeah, that's a perfect question. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to go further into that. Cause yeah, ultimately, like, I mean, I'll probably sound, I would totally understand if, you know, people listening to this later would sound that, or would think that I sound, like I'm contradicting myself. But yeah, I mean, ultimately anyone's faith, I guess I would just start in the place of anyone's faith, about spirituality and God in general. You do have to choose it for yourself. You can't mandate it for anyone else, because that, at the end of the day, that is the definition of faith. It's choosing, you know, it's putting yourself out there and choosing to rest your faith in something that you, at least while on earth, that you ultimately can't tangibly prove. I mean, I guess that is where it gets more into more of my personally held views and beliefs is, if you can prove the existence of a God, at least as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, if God let us prove his existence, he would be an idol. And so I feel like that's a lot of what it comes down to for me as a Christian, is the very act and decision of faith is defined by the fact that it's voluntary, and it's also not like we can't necessarily prove the existence of God. It's just all about that kind of dynamic response of faith of, you know, God is saying, well, the only thing required to be a Christian and to believe in me is to have faith in me. And it's that same response back that we give him in saying that, well, you know, I can't prove tangibly necessarily to just within human life that like God exists, but the faith rests there on, you know, the promise of salvation. So that's at least kind of the basic idea of it. But yeah, I mean, there's kind of, I guess, just a few pillars that I come back to if I were to weave together all of the elements of how Christian veganism works for me. So it's the Genesis 1:29 piece. It's also the piece of like I said before, I don't have perfect knowledge. It'd be nice if I did, but that would also that would just mean that I wasn't human anymore, because part of the nature of being human is making the best conclusions you can on insufficient premises. And then what else would there be? Basically just trusting that, you know, the facts that I've derived from smaller pictures all make sense in the bigger picture than they do by themselves. Because we can, like we were talking about before, and kind of like you were saying too, if we take like small pieces of the puzzle and kind of pit them against each other to kind of battle it out, if we take like the Luke references of Jesus eating fish, if we're to take that, you know, literally, and if we're to take that like as that's exactly what happened and there's no ambiguity there, and we pit that up against you know, just kind of the same idea of Jesus saying, well, you know, do unto others as you would want to be done to you, and things like that. If we're just kind of battling out the small pieces, everybody would get very exhausted in just kind of trying to plod their way along the path and figure out every little thing on its own. But it's almost like when you take every piece of the puzzle and you kind of look at it in the bigger picture, and you realize that, I mean, it's not even strictly in the New Testament that, like Jesus is a perfect example of what Christianity represents in the New Testament. But if we go back into the Old Testament, we see that, I mean, it's Isaiah, it's both Isaiah 1 and Isaiah 11, where God's talking about, like, he doesn't want worship charades, as he calls it. He doesn't want animal sacrifices. He doesn't want the ritualistic kind of empty practice of faith. He doesn't want just us going through the motions. He wants the heart. And he says that unambiguously in Isaiah, where he's like, I don't want a dead animal on an altar for me. That doesn't mean anything to me, because you're having to kill the animal first, and then even then it's just kind of a very kind of rote mechanistic practice. So God himself says all over the place that he's like, I don't need an animal sacrifice to know that someone's legitimate. I just need their heart, and I want to see like what they practice in their day-to-day life, and what their heart really looks like, because it's out of the heart is what someone's actions are going to manifest as. And another thing too is I think it's very quickly glossed over in a lot of conversations I'll have with Christians, or even that Christians will have amongst themselves, is people very quickly say like, oh, well, everybody ate meat back then. Like, why can't we do it now? But one thing that people overlook quickly is factory farming didn't exist back then. And even if it did on a very small level, just in the sense of like keeping animals together in confined spaces, it's certainly factory farming that we know it as today certainly didn't exist back then. It's just so far and away unnecessary. And there's no question to me that if Jesus were alive today, he would be entirely, unapproving of how we're harvesting and treating animals now and procuring them for food. So yeah, I basically just look at the bigger picture, and then, everything. I just a couple of days ago too, I was talking with a Christian friend about all these topics, and everything that the Christian faith rests on is salvation through faith, like I was saying before. Even though I will, champion veganism for as long as I live, and I'll do it, within the compatibility of Christianity. Christianity is the only thing that, I would put my life on the line for before veganism. And, ultimately that's the only one requirement of Christian faith is, salvation through faith. And so ultimately it's kind of like, if someone were to, and couple people have kind of come up to me and said, well, if you had to choose between the two, like it's always, Christian friends coming up and saying, well, if you had to choose between the two, like, what would you choose? And it's like, well, of course, like, my faith is more important to me. And I've done all my research and all my, just in my daily life, I've committed to that. So it's like, of course I would choose my faith before veganism, but I think it bothers me that people think that they're mutually exclusive, or that that they have to pressure me to pick one, because they just kind of, I think veganism bothers people if they aren't interested in it, and so they kind of just want to see if someone would give veganism up in a lose-lose situation. But yeah, kind of to sum all that up, it's really just, it's focusing on the bigger picture, and it's knowing that far and away everything that I've read within context in the Bible, like the bigger picture unambiguously points towards, a vegan earth, or the desire and ability to have one, certainly from God. So the bigger picture points to that. And then ultimately it's that, my faith is the only larger component of everything else in my life, but veganism fits enough into that, especially when we look into context. And, there's a couple books that I'm waiting on showing up in the mail so I can look even further into it. Cause I feel like, there were, a number of things that over time have been decontextualized, within the New Testament specifically. And, it's the Christian's job to look into that. Cause, if someone takes their faith seriously, they should, pour themselves into figuring out as much as they can about it. That's at least my view on it. So
I find it super interesting that you were posed with the question, which one would you have to choose? Because I was posed with the exact same question.
Yeah, me too.
But came to a different answer. And I think the reason being is, for me, veganism was the first truth that I actually believed in, if that makes sense. Where religion, like your Christianity, was your first real belief. Like I was raised religious, but I never had a real belief. I don't almost want to say I wasn't probably old enough to develop that belief yet. And so, yeah, I chose, definitely veganism. Yeah, I would choose veganism any time. And I really think that comes down to what our first main truth was. And for you, that was Christianity, but for me, that was veganism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is a really good point. I think, there's a lot of, there's so much truth to that. And there's a lot of areas of crossover with that too. Like, I'm a huge heavy music fan. And so Jamie Jasta from Hatebreed has a lyric that perfectly sums up what you were just talking about too. He says, you only put your faith in what's truly sincere for you. Or I think the more exact lyric is just some slightly simplified version of that. Like, you only put your faith where it's truly sincere. But so that's so true. Everybody is looking for something that they can base a lot of the rest of their life around and a lot of their daily habits around. And I can totally understand that. People are going to end up championing what first became something that they could see, really the rest of their life revolving around. So that totally.
What are some ways that people can find out about your book and find out more about what you do and get involved with the things you do?
Yeah, to learn more about the book, people can go to booklaunch.io/start-and-never-stop/justice is served. Once again, that's just booklaunch.io/start-and-never-stop/justice is served.
Whichside Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Whichside Media Collective, with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Go to whichsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always,
this is Brandon Mullins calling from Crossville, Tennessee. Fuck, shit, damn.